Hello everyone. Today I'm planning to comment on Eric Weinstein appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast. I should tell straight away that I haven't watched the whole episode yet. I have only watched a small portion of it where they're discussing Seiberg-Witten equations, and that's what I decided to comment on. Let's watch this part. If you have already watched it, well, you could just skip it. Let me show you. Here's what they're talking about.
But I can't, I've been 40 years trying to have this conversation with a competent person. And every excuse under the sun is used to avoid talking about what I'm saying. And I'll say some stuff that, when I, 1987 around, I proposed a set of equations that were like the junior version of geometric unity. I was told that those equations were insufficiently nonlinear, that they involve spinors, and spinors have nothing to do with something called self-duality, that I violated the spin statistics theorem, a whole bunch of things. And I was invited to leave Harvard, where they said, you have to move out of Massachusetts. You cannot live in Massachusetts. And I said, you don't have the right to tell me where I can live. It's not part of our agreement.
Yeah, I don't know. This is kind of weird. I don't know what was happening there.
They said, well, if you want to continue in this department, you have to move out of Massachusetts. I only
What was the reasoning behind that?
Yeah,
they thought I was wrong and crazy.
So,
Let me keep, okay. In 1994, Ed Whitten is giving a lecture in the main seminar room in Building 2 in the MIT Math Department, where I am now a postdoc under a National Science Foundation fellowship. So I've gone through huge trouble and I crawled back on top. And Ed Whitten says the self-duality revolution, which is related to Jim Simon's work, which I was saying before. He says, theoretically, you don't have to deal with these super complicated equations anymore. And he doesn't say what replaces them. And a guy named, I think, Alan Knudsen, who's now at Cornell, I think raises his hand like a punk. And he says, do you want to tell us what equations we would use instead? And Ed Whitten writes down these set of two equations. And I look at them and I say, those are equations that I proposed at Harvard in like 5 years ago, or 7 years ago. And I said, that's really interesting. He's about to get told that they're insufficiently nonlinear, that they involve spinors, which can't possibly involve self-duality, and that he's violated spin statistics. And I'm looking forward to watching what happens when Ed Whitten is told this. A couple weeks later, I'm at the MIT commissary with Isinger and the math physics group, and a guy named Andras Senish, Hungarian brilliant guy, now in Geneva, I think, says, have you heard the news? He comes by. I said, what news? All of Donaldson theory in self-dual equations is falling. It's like, what? It's like, they were using the wrong equations. Everything has become trivially easy. Can you bring up an article called Gauge Theory is Dead, Long Live Gauge Theory? So, like, I didn't want to tell these stories the last time. This is like super painful, but I'm done with this stuff. I'm just completely done with this. So, you see, there was this thing called the self-dual equations, which Isidore Singer brought to Michael Atiyah and Nigel Hitchen. Oh, the other one was if spinors were involved, Nigel Hitchen would know and he would have told us, which is bullshit. Keep going to the next page.
So he means that the old Donaldson equations were the self-duality equations. This one, right? And Witten proposed a different version. These ones.
new gauge theory. You see those two equations, dA of phi equals 0. I had written psi rather than phi. Phi has to do with the spin of the field. But Fa plus equals I had written these things down in a slightly different form and had been effectively laughed out of Harvard for this. And it turns out that what was going on was Ed Whitten had written these things down, and now all of these people were converted. And a lecture is given in room 507 in the Harvard Math Department on the 5th floor, across from the office of a guy named Raoul Bott, who is absolutely not my advisor, but the internet is determined to make him my advisor. It's making me really upset. Raoul Bott is my hero, but he was not my advisor. He's a great man, and you shouldn't do that to him. You shouldn't do that to me. So I go to this lecture, and the person giving it was really the closest thing I had to an advisor, if it's not a guy named Dror Barnatan, is the brother of somebody you've had on your program. You've had Gary Taubes on your program. His brother is named Clifford Taubes. And Clifford Taubes had picked a fight with Princeton. And he had said, you know, these guys at Princeton, we work our asses off to get these results in Donaldson theory. These equations are so hard, and then always after the fact, Princeton tells us what we're really doing. You know, thanks, God. So it was a fight between Cambridge and Princeton. And now he's got to eat crow, okay? So he's giving this lecture, and he titles it, Witten's Magical Equations. This is the same guy who tells me that I can't live in Massachusetts in 1987. And he's going on, he's like saying, this is the greatest day of my life. I was in prison, I was working at hard labor for 10 years. These equations make everything trivially easy. I am sitting in the back row of room 507, picking my nose. And a guy in the front seat, right-hand side, is named David Kazdan, one of the most brilliant people on the planet. And he usually falls asleep.
He's a very famous mathematician, very strong. Yeah.
During the lecture. He's like a Soviet Jew who got through the anti-Semitic system at Moscow State, like unbelievable line. And he says, excuse me, Cliff, didn't we have a student at some point who told us to look at the spinor bundles and maybe these equations? And Cliff goes white as a ghost, and I'm picking my nose, right nostril, and the entire room swivels and looks at me. And then I realize, like, everybody actually remembers what I was saying, and my thesis is on the spinor bundles, all this stuff. And I have this question, do I tell them the whole theory? And I left mathematics at that moment. I just decided, I can't trust you people. Cliff knows the answer. Cliff is supposed to say, you know, Eric told me to look at that. And he won't do it. He's sitting there giving the credit, not even to Seiberg and Witten, who are the two people who do these equations. He's giving the whole thing to Witten because he's scared, because he's apologizing. He's saying, I screwed up. I doubted you, Princeton. Princeton was right, Harvard was wrong. New Jersey beats Massachusetts. Tough shit. That's the way it goes. But Massachusetts actually had an entrant in that game, and that was me. And then Isidore Singer writes somewhere in one of his papers, you know, I learned about this years ago, before from Eric Weinstein, a paper with Cano and Ballou. So this was my trajectory. This is why I left mathematics, in part because I realized that there was just no honor, there was no way of making a name, and like people are just going to give away my stuff. So when I did this draft of GU, I said I'm an entertainer. People don't have any clue why.
Well, okay, that's a pretty dramatic story, which he told. So I decided to try to figure out what happened. Yeah, I don't know exactly. So the first thing I did, I decided to look at his PhD thesis, right? PhD thesis, because I think he made a pretty easily verifiable claim, right? That he has derived the Seiberg-Witten equations, right? Okay, no, it's a wrong article, but yeah, it's equations himself, and he gives references in this talk to his PhD thesis. Here it is, Weinstein, Eric Ross. In fact, indeed, we could see there's no really scientific advisor here. There's only committee members, and two committee members are indeed Raoul Bott and Dora Barnatan. And the date is September 24, 1992. So if we look at the paper, even in the abstract, he already mentioned that he is dealing with 8-dimensional manifolds. But again, we see that here in the contents, he mentions 4-dimensional manifolds as implications. And I kind of scroll through the whole paper just to make sure, I wouldn't miss something accidentally. But I think you could just go straight to chapter 6, where he describes applications to 4 dimensions, right? Yeah, I guess I should have mentioned, that whole story is happening in dimension 4, right? You see certain smooth for manifolds, right? We are talking about invariants of 4-dimensional manifolds. So that's why we're looking for dimension 4 here. Here's where it starts. You see n equals to 4, and I just scroll through all of it. I didn't quite find anything of that form. Here he's just talking about how he writes down Einstein equation in this form, but there's no nothing more to it. And then, as you can see, he continues dimension 6, 7, 8, which is again not where Seiberg-Witten equations are written. Maybe he means some sort of generalizations of them, and maybe he wants, maybe to take some sort of dimensional reduction of, equation here, for example, and he'll get Seiberg-Witten equation. I don't know, but I haven't found it here. Now, if you scroll to the very bottom, there is a last paragraph which is called spin 10 phenomenology, and here he's talking about potential physical application for his theory, and we see that here he already had the beginning of his geometric unity idea. Here we have our 4-dimensional space-time, right? With signature 1, 3, so it's 1 time plus 3 space. And he considers certain embedding into high-dimensional space, which again has to be at least 14-dimensional. At least they assume it like this. And that's, I guess, in his geometric unity paper will become the space of metrics. But in this case, he just kind of comments that if we had such thing, we could have considered the derive operator on this total space and then restricted to the image of this immersion embedding, and we would get, derive operator with values in some bundle, which he says should be the spinor total spin bundle of the normal bundle to this image of immersion, right? I haven't actually done this calculation carefully, so I already immediately see that this could only make sense if G is even, right? So I don't know, maybe he assumes that G is even. I don't know for sure. And then he goes explaining something about ground unification theory and how he just want to get this SU5 group, which is where our SU3 times SU2 times U1 should embed into, right, in this ground unification problem, which used to be popular in the past. And more or less that's all. So the thesis kind of ends. Thesis ends. You have appendix. So I just hasn't found anything here. So I don't know whether it's his claim is truthful or not. And in fact, yeah, when I was looking into the geometric unity question, I found a post by a person who also questioned the legitimacy of his claim, because when I asked Weinstein for certain mathematical details about how he had arrived at the Seiberg-Witten equations, his vague responses led me to doubt his claims. Yeah, I guess he had the same concerns. Now, with this story about how he got laughed out from Harvard for writing them down, if we assume that that's what happened, of course I can't say for sure, but maybe he already back then was trying to make claims like this is our theory of everything or something like this. I don't know. Of course, if you do it right, if you make such bold claims, if you claim you to have a theory of everything, the requirements for it will be very high, right? Like I don't know what exactly he was proposing there and in which context. When he was talking about spin statistic violation, that's relevant for physical theories, right? If the theory kind of supposes, if the theory which we are discussing supposed to describe the actual world, then the physical field, they satisfy the spin statistic theorem. But what the Seiberg-Witten equations were has nothing to do with actual physical theories. And then the spin statistic violation doesn't really matter. I should have probably explained in the first place. So what was done there? So Donaldson was using self-duality equations, or the model space of these solutions, to construct invariants of four-dimensional manifolds. Essentially, his invariants were the integrals, equivalent integrals of the instanton moduli spaces. Well, okay, I'm not sure, not always has to be even equivalent. I guess depending on the situation. From the physics perspective, from the quantum field theory perspective, that's like calculating correlation functions and partition function of some supersymmetric gauge theory in some special topologically twisted sector, what's called. And indeed, as the theory was non-abelian gauge theory, the theory in question was SU2 gauge theory, the equations are nonlinear and they're very hard. And that's what Eric was talking about. But Witten noticed that if you just apply physical intuition to this super young Mills and you just go into low energy limit, your gauge groove will be like spontaneously broken. You will have the condensate of this scalar field, which again will act as a Higgs boson for non-diagonal component of this SU2 matrix, SU2 gauge field, making them massive, effectively preserving only the diagonal part. And diagonal part means like billion gauge theory. So that's how he gets the idea that we could have a simpler description of some sort of similar invariance. Not exactly quite the same, by the way. They mentioned that there are certain situations, if you read this paper fully, they're not really equivalent. So it's not like the song got completely cancelled. No, so that's approximately the story. And since then, mathematician was like, were really glad about using this way simpler description. And yeah, I don't know, maybe indeed what Eric was saying here in this was even happening indeed in the context of this mathematical application. Because yeah, he said that they're not sufficiently nonlinear, yeah, in the sense that, well, they're too simple, right? And what he said that they evaluate spin statistics. I guess that just, yeah, that's what happens when we use this trick of topological twisting. It's somewhat confusing, but in the end, it's just more like a point of view on a theory, more convenient point of view to kind of highlight the sector which you care about in this particular question. And that's this kind of notion lead to very rich development in math. So yeah, here is the paper where people explain what kind of twist he needed and what exactly you need to do to derive this equation. And they're basically saying that the Seiberg-Witten equation are the same anti-self-duality equation in disguise, you see. So we label some components of the SU2 gauge field as psi, and indeed they say change in the Grassmann parity. So that's probably what he meant by violation of spin statistic. But again, for non-physical fields, we don't really care about it at all. For example, even in physical theory, like QCD, we have ghost fields which violate spin statistic theorem because they're not really observable themselves, they're fictitious fields. Here we are not even talking about physical theory, we are talking about some sort of quasi-mathematical notion or formalism which was helpful in order to derive mathematical invariance of four manifolds. Like these fields which appear in this discussion, they don't supposed to correspond to any fields in our particular universe, and that's not really the point here. The point here is just we study those fields on four manifolds to characterize the structure of this four manifold better. This is a smooth structure to distinguish one four manifold from another using this kind of toy quantum field theory living in it. That's the idea. So again, if Eric was claiming something else and he was saying it's something to do with our universe, well, that's of course would be kind of crazy, right? I don't know exactly what he was saying. Maybe he meant exactly what Whitten said. I don't know. He has to give, I guess, more details. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't guess what happened. I might ask David Kashdan when I see him, but I couldn't really say more. But it's certainly wrong to think what he's just saying here, that those people also just converted by Witten. It's just like a religion. I don't think it's right. Most likely, if Eric wrote down those equations, he didn't quite motivated them well enough. Didn't quite explain what they meant, and what the expectations are, and why we should study them. He didn't give this idea that you have this four-dimensional supersymmetric theory, or you go to low energy limit, where non-diagonal part of gauge field is Higgs, and then you have effectively U1 theory with monopoles, and here's the monopole equation. Yeah, I guess he didn't explain any of that. Or maybe it's true that he just didn't have, there was no really good arguments for why they should be studied, and he didn't have enough, recognition and influence. Indeed, maybe it's true that if we didn't say something, people kind of look more into it than if some sort of student said this. Again, I don't rule it out, but it's still his fault that he wasn't able to convince people and give the proper arguments for why it should be interesting equation to study. Of course, if it's even true that he had them, because I just don't see it. I haven't found them anywhere in his thesis, and neither on his webpage. I don't know how to verify his claims. Just studying spinor bundles is not enough to claim that you have something to do with Seiberg-Witten equations. Of course, no. It's like you need to write them down. You need to. It's a very specific equation, right? Very non-trivial, so to say, and not really motivated. Self-duality equation in disguise, right? After topological twist. Yeah, I guess that's all I could say. Of course, it's a kind of sad story, because I guess for Eric, he still felt that he was wronged and he was upset, and he now thinks that all the theoretical physicists are entirely dogmatic and they just follow Witten wherever they go. I don't think it's quite true. Well, I know it was a little bit messy, but hope you still got the main idea.